Don't let extremists on either side destroy the virtues the name stands for.
Well, Tyler, let's make a decision in changing the name to move forward. We have a great opportunity here.
Change Robert E. Lee, we gotta change John Tyler. Change John Tyler, we gotta change Tyler. It never ends.
Nearly a year later, the debate shows no signs of ending.
Regarding the name change, I have something to say.
Anytime soon.
CBS 19 presents What's in a Name? Hate or History? Today, the debate over Robert E. Lee's place in history is louder than ever.
Yeah, instead of ignoring the conversation tonight, we're bringing it right into your living room with community leaders and people just like you at home. Before we dive in, it's important that we take you back to Charlottesville, Virginia, last August.
A day that for some became a reminder of a very dark time in our nation's history.
CBS 19's J.J. Maldonado takes us through a timeline of changes around the country following that day.
1 person dead, 34 people injured. That was the result of a rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, August 12, 2017. The rally, advertised as Unite the Right, protested the removal of the statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides.
While the Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville remains intact, the deadly rally resulted in many other Confederate statues across the United States removed and toppled down from their post.
This event has been declared an unlawful assembly.
In Baltimore, 4 Confederate monuments were removed 3 days after the Charlottesville protest. Baltimore City Council voted to take down their statues from public parks around the city. 2 days after the protest in Virginia and Durham, North Carolina, a crowd of protesters tore down another Confederate monument outside the Old County Courthouse. In the neighboring state of Tennessee, the city of Memphis sold 2 of its public parks to a nonprofit. The organization then removed its Confederate monuments. In Dallas, a Robert E. Lee statue was removed in September of 2017 from Oaklawn Park. Currently, the statue sits in storage as the city tries to sell the fixture. And on the campus of UT Austin, students awoke to find several statues honoring Confederate leaders were removed in the cover of the night a week after the Charlottesville protest. In Tyler, J.J. Maldonado, CBS 18.
Now, something we've noticed from even our own coverage about Robert E. Lee and John Tyler is that a lot of people, really, they're misinformed. Many think they have the two figured out, but do they really?
Yeah, who are these guys and what did they stand for? We sat down with 2 historians who will dispel myths and support the facts. 2 names, 2 men, both from Virginia, causing quite the uproar in East Texas and at times across the country. We're talking about General Robert Edward Lee and President John Tyler. To really get an idea of who they were, we sought the help of 2 historians.
Draw a picture of a typical Southern plantation owner. John Tyler would fit.
Born in Charles City County, Virginia, at his family's plantation, John Tyler grew up wealthy and began his political career at 21 years old. At 51 years old, he became our nation's 10th president.
John Tyler was known for mainly being the first vice president to become president after a president died. It was really a constitutional crisis.
He also has unique ties to Texas.
He started the ball rolling on the annexation of Texas. But Tyler took an unusual move, and this is where Tyler, and this is why he's prominent in Texas. He was championing Texas annexation. Texans did not want to be an independent nation.
Tyler would seek a joint resolution in hopes of annexing our state. He also held a strong stance on some of the most controversial issues.
Oh, he was just adamantly pro-slavery extension. He was a committed member of the slaveocracy. So he was a career politician, but also closely tied to the plantation aristocracy.
Then there's General Robert E. Lee, whose name is often subjected to scrutiny. But there's more to the general than people realize.
Friendly to people, kind, good-hearted, kept his temper under control. And so those are the 2 characteristics most people remember about him and admire him for.
He was the general of the Confederate Army during the American Civil War, a war that, depending on who you ask, Dr. Tafe says, you might receive different interpretations.
If you boil it all down, some people will tell you it was economics, some people will tell you it was states' rights. It all comes down to slavery. What's the state right that Southerners were trying to hold on to? It was their commitment to slavery and the slave system. So the war was about slavery. There are other aspects to it, but all boiled down to slavery.
Slavery. It's often something many people refer to when you hear Confederacy or General Lee. So what exactly was General Lee's stance?
He opposed slavery, he opposed secession, but his loyalty to his state. But people have a hard time understanding a loyalty to a state over the nation as a whole. But that's how a lot of people viewed it before the Civil War.
All right, with me now, Dr. Scott Sosebee, an associate professor of history at Stephen F. Austin University. He also does a lot of work with the East Texas Historical Association. Dr. Sosebee, thank you again for being here today. I appreciate it. Now, one of the pieces, the sound bites, didn't make it to the piece, right? It was talking about when you hear General Lee's name, right? It's kind of like a lightning rod. But John Tyler, talk about both and what they mean.
Well, everybody associates Lee with this debate over monuments and slavery and race relations. Lee was actually not near the committed supporter of slavery that John Tyler was. Tyler was a very, very committed advocate of continued slavery, continued extension.
What was John Tyler's relationship with Texas?
He started the annexation process. Without John Tyler, Texas does not get annexed in 1845.
Other myths. Are there any other myths out there that you're willing to dispel?
Myths I would like to dispel, I think, on this issue more than anything else, is that this issue is not about the men. It's about the context of what's happening. It's not about Lee. It's not about Tyler. It's about when these schools were named, when these monuments were put up. Lee is just a lightning rod for what it meant. Robert E. Lee and Tyler was opened in 1957. What was going on in 1957?
Yeah.
There's schools in Texas were not being named for Robert E. Lee in the 1870s or the 1890s, 1920s. They were being named for Robert E. Lee in the 1950s and the 1960s.
Good stuff. On a more controversial note, if you could sum things up regarding what each man stood for, sum up each person.
As far as the men, John Tyler stood for privilege, aristocracy. He was not a little d Democrat. He was part of the Southern hegemony that was, they weren't for freedom. They were for their class, which was the plantation class. Robert E. Lee was a military man. He was an honorable man, and that's what, more than anything else, he believed in honor.
Do you think either of those gentlemen would care about their names being plastered on schools, or would they care that folks are trying to get it taken off? How would each of them react?
John Tyler would care greatly. John Tyler would have wanted his name put up as much as anything else. John Tyler wanted to be famous. Robert E. Lee, I suspect, would have said, there's no reason to name anything after me.
All right, Dr. Sosebee, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here and offering your insight. We appreciate you being here. Brian, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Hopefully putting some of that misinformation to rest will help us through one of the biggest issues in the city of Tyler right now. What do we do with Robert E. Lee High School? It's a question that started shortly after the deadly clashes in Charlottesville. An online petition went up days later pushing to keep the name of the school the same. It didn't take long for another petition to start calling for a name change. This is an issue that split community leaders, alums, and current students at both Robert E. Lee and John Tyler High School. So tonight we brought in a group to help us have a respectful conversation on the name change debate. Daryl Bowdry, Blake Bailey, Nick Pacina Jr., Benet Embry, who were all for changing the names, along with Claire and Dustin Faulkner, who want to keep the names the same.
It's very important that we note that we asked several people who were against changing the name to come onto our program.
In the last 24 hours, many have backed out, but the conversation will go on with the guests that we do have. We'll hear from them in just a few moments.
Now, to make sure all opinions are heard, we are inviting you to join in on our conversation. We're streaming this forum live right now on Facebook. You have something you want to ask our panel? Let us know in the comments section.
You'll hear from our guest when we return in 2 minutes. You're watching the CBS 19 special report, What's in a Name, Hate or History?
couch. And he'll be on the couch, and y'all two will be up in the back.
Yeah, put y'all together. Let's go in between you.
Somebody pull us out later.
Where are my anchors?
Where's my anchors going? Try not to fall on me.
You want to lean, probably sit towards the front.
Okay. Good idea.
Look at them.
How you doing?
What's happening? What's happening?
Where do we look?
So that'll be the.
Back up, Mike 5. All right.
Just look at me. They answered the question for me. They say just look at us.
Just look at y'all? Okay.
How you doing?
Good, how are you, Tashara?
Add Kemar Jones' name.
Kemar Jones.
Yep.
Yes, Kemar.
Okay. I'll follow you on Facebook too. Return to Facebook.
Hi, Daryl.
How are you, man?
Good. How are you?
Good, good to see you.
All right, welcome back, guys. Before we get started, we want to set a few rules to make sure everyone has a chance to be heard. And although this is a discussion, we want to be respectful of each other.
Absolutely. So everyone will get a chance to share their opinion as long as it's respectful. So let's get right to what has us all here tonight.
Now, we just heard from a historian about Robert E. Lee and John Tyler's places in history. Many have been miseducated about who they were and what they represented. Are any of you reconsidering your stance after hearing from the historian? There, Bowdre, I'll go ahead and start with you. You've been very vocal about changing Robert E. Lee. Now, hearing what he just said, what would you say about John Tyler as well?
Well, I've never been in favor of changing the name of John Tyler because, again, like the commentary said, like the historian said on the piece, John Tyler was never used as a symbol or a lightning rod for racism or discrimination, whereas Robert E. Lee was.
Well, for those of you that are favoring the change, a lot of people say it's like erasing history. What would you say to that? Benet?
What history are you trying to erase? My history goes back 3 generations to a bill of sale at Abbeville, Louisiana, on a plantation. It comes down to the fact of what are we trying to erase? Is that the heritage that we're trying to acclimate and teach our children about? True enough, yes, history can never be changed. You have to have, it's going to be in the history books, but you don't put somebody like that in a place of honor or glory or anything like that, because the simple fact was that Robert E. Lee and John Tyler were both terrorists. They were both traitors to their country, and they both spilled American blood on American soil and fought for the ideal of subjugation of an entire race of people. That's the bottom line.
Strong words, Benet. Claire, Dustin, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of anger about that, and I would not agree with the gentleman below me that they are put in a place of honor to be spilling the blood of a certain group of people. In fact, the historian never even mentioned that he freed his slaves 10 years before even the Civil War. What happened with that? And they chose to stay with him. That would be an honorable man, right? Now, nobody's sitting there and saying that we want to keep around the name of somebody who hated a bunch of people. It's about the honorable man, and they would love to emulate the honor that this guy has.
Benet, were you going to respond?
I was going to respond because regardless of if he had slaves, if he agreed in slavery, but he had some loyalty to the Confederate ideal. Look at Robert Lee's school song, red for loyalty, white for purity. What type of purity are you talking about? There's nothing pure about the South. It's nothing pure about taking people and using and referring to them as 3/5 of a human, as barn animals, as property. So every time you see an African-American child running down a football field, a basketball court with the thing Robert Lee or John Tyler across their chest, it's basically like saying you're still owned. You're still part of that culture and that ideal and that mindset.
Now, Claire, were you going to weigh in? Were you about to say something? Okay, all right, well, that's okay. We can go ahead and move on. A lot of the argument for changing the name is how do minority students like African Americans feel going to a school that has the name of a Confederate war general? During Monday night's community meeting, one teacher said this: "Can you imagine being a black person going to a high school under the name of a slave owner and feeling secure and loved and respected?" Can't even imagine that. What would you say to people who feel the same way? Anybody can jump in and answer this. Nick, would you like to jump in?
Well, I think it's very important to think about the future. I respect the historian's perspective. I respect the perspectives of the past and perhaps even the present. But I think this is as much about the future as anything else. And it's really about a community identity and what we want to be known for. It's not, to me, a white issue, a black issue, a brown issue, red or blue. It's about a community issue, and we're all Tyler.
It's kind of interesting. Benet brought up the alma mater, and we're going to talk about that actually. Some might find this particular part offensive, and you alluded to it. Robert E. Lee, we raise our voice in praise of your name. May honor and glory e'er guide you to fame. Long may your colors and their symbols recall faithfully that red is for courage and white for purity.
Now, can you imagine asking a Jewish child to recite something like that for a high school called Adolf Hitler High? You understand what I'm saying? Think about it like this. Now, 9/11 was a horrific act here in the U.S. that took the lives of a lot of American people. Would you want a high school named after one of those terrorists, which Robert E. Lee and John Tyler both were terrorists, and ask your child to go to that high school? Is that what we have come down to? It's not a black and white issue. It's about justice. It's about equality. It's about, I'm just not talking about Robert E. Lee and John Tyler. Hubbard, Rice, we have a school named Dixie, for Christ's sake. And so all of those schools are tied into the Confederacy in some type of way. And that's supposed to be right. I'm supposed to tell my child to go to a school like that with all that stigma in the background and expect them to learn. Learning is more about books. It's about the environment that the child is in as well.
Benet's pretty fired up about this. Claire, what do you think about those words of that song? Do they strike you in a way? Did you know that was the words of the song?
No, I didn't know. I went to John Tyler, so I didn't know the Robert E. Lee song, but I don't find it offensive. I went to a school where I was basically there wasn't very many white people that went there. And it didn't bother me. I got along with everybody, so I don't find the song offensive at all.
Well, Mr. Bailey, any thoughts on either the song or just overall in general?
Yeah, I do have some. I always have thoughts.
Well, of course you.
But anytime you come to me and say, "Do you have thoughts?" You don't even have to ask
You got
me.
something.
There you go. You got something.
I'm sure I have a thought. The studies I've made of Robert E. Lee was he seemed like a pretty cool guy, a nice fellow. He had a fairly healthy attitude towards the slaves that he inherited and released them. But here's the point. Lee had no connection with Texas. The only reason he went into the Civil War as a commander was because of Virginia. We had no tie in with him. But when you start thinking about it, it's not just the name of Lee. I wrote some things down that I read the other day. We had a rebel mascot, Confederate flags, one of the biggest in the nation, Dixie fight song, Rebelettes drill team. The officers, 13. Why? 13 stars in the Confederate flag. So my point is that it's not just Robert E. Lee, but it's the fact that there was a huge entrenchment into the Dixie Confederacy slavery mentality that was wrong. It was the wrong thing. And something else, we had some brave school board people who took those things out in 1972 based on a federal judge ruling.
Right.
They were forced to. They didn't do it. They didn't do it voluntarily.
I personally know two of them who did it and wanted to do it and intended to do it. They got hate calls at home.
But you know,
they got hate mail because they did that. Now, we're way beyond Robert E. Lee. We're talking into a mentality, whether Lee was in it or not, that's just not right.
All right, obviously you guys have a lot to say. We're going to have to wrap the conversation up, at least just for now, but we will be back to this entire panel, and everyone will have a chance to weigh in on more. Now it's time to hear from a few students.
In a few minutes, I'll chat with Tania Jones, Matthew Spellman, Brandon Collins, and Kemar Jones. Right
right here.
Oh, okay. I want a cigarette. That's what I really want.
Oh, well, you'll have to go out the front.
No, I ain't gonna do it right now.
Oh, okay. He's worked up. Yeah, and we'll come get you. It'll be one more segment where they're talking to the kids, and then y'all will be back out in a minute.
Oh, thank you.
No problem. Check.
I don't know where my position is.
Brian, just get next to them. There's
You want me on this side or
more
you
of
want me
us
on
than
that side?
this side. This side.
Okay.
And Matthew?
Brandon.
Tania.
And you? Kimar.
In order to make progress as a community, we at least have to be able to vote on a name change.
Each year, Robert E. Lee is the name that follows my own and my peers. For much of the student body and I, Lee's name is symbolic for the slavery endorsed during the Civil War.
I believe changing the name of a high school is a small step toward a larger goal of social equality for every person in our country.
They are emerging as one of the biggest voices in the push to change the name of Robert E. Lee High School. At this week's school board meeting, several students spoke very passionately about why changing the name means so much to them. Now, some of those students are here with us tonight, so let's jump right into it. Guys, we put some of your speeches live on Facebook, and there were some heartfelt, passionate responses. In fact, one user commented, get this, if they don't change the name after hearing from those kids, they don't have a heart. What do you guys think about that? Tania, we'll go to you first.
I think that they were right about the passion. This is something that genuinely, it means a lot to a lot of us. And if it didn't mean a lot to me, I wouldn't be out here, I wouldn't be taking a part in any of this. But yeah, they're right about the passion.
Why are kids so passionate?
Because we as a generation, we're starting to open our minds and open our hearts and listen to people who are different than ourselves. And when you do that and when you commit yourself to justice and to doing what's right, it's hard not to, it's hard not to say something.
Why is it hard not to say something? I mean, for all these years, people haven't said anything. So what makes you guys different?
Well, the thing is, times are changing, things are happening. This is a world where we are becoming new. The old is being taken out and the new is being ushered in. What I believe, young people have a passion because we're the future. Right. We got to know what's right, and we're being brought up in a world where names like Robert E. Lee and John Tyler are still around. I just met Matthew, Brandon, and Tania backstage. John Tyler and Robert E. Lee didn't fight for this. They fought to keep us apart. Mm-hmm. And these look like lovely young men and women. So I believe that our passion needs to be even stronger and that we need to push forward. That's how I believe.
Did you watch that part? Did you guys watch that part with the history of John Tyler? Did that surprise any of you? Did that surprise anyone? Did you know those details?
I knew a few of them. I knew Lee personally. I know that he, fought for slavery or whatever, but I did know that he also, after the war, he went back to Virginia. He fought for our country to be reconciliated, and he fought for monuments not to be built having anything to do with the Confederacy. I understand that he doesn't want himself and other things to be like monumented and memorialized because it tears us apart. And so I respect that for him, and I understand that that shouldn't be a monument or whatever. So yeah.
Brandon, we talked about it yesterday. What are kids saying in school? Are they talking about this subject? I mean, is it a back and forth?
The majority are uneducated on the topic, so they'd rather, stay on the safe side and say, well, I don't know. And that can be okay, but it's really not. This is something we should know. We should know the history of our city. We should know the history of these names and these men and their stories. We should, honestly try to get more education on the topic. Like, I'd learned some of this, but the majority of it, I had to do my own research.
Ignorance is not a choice, is what you're telling me.
Oh, not at all.
So it's important for you guys that this comes to at least a vote, at least a discussion.
Yes. When you learn about this issue and that the name was chosen not in the 1890s, right after the Civil War, but during the Civil Rights Movement, 2 years after Brown versus Board of Education, it's hard. It becomes really apparent that this was a choice to send a message, and that this was a choice to divide our community and to subjugate the people on the north side of Tyler. It's just apparent once you learn the history, and that's why a lot of people don't know it, I think, because once they do know it, it's hard to stand in the same way that you were beforehand.
One more question for you guys. Let's say we get all the way through this. A vote comes up, it goes to vote, and they say, nope, we're keeping the name. For you guys, does the fight end? Is that it? Is it over?
No. America, I learned this, and America was built on fighting. We had to fight to become America in the first place. And once we got there, we had to create our own society, what we created. And with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and all that, and it said that all men are equal. And what it is that right here, this is what we can fight for. These are people that are known and know, as people say, woke. And that what we have to do
I don't say woke.
Oh, well, yeah.
But I'm also 47. So.
But piggyback on what he was saying about how people are ignorant and not knowing, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And I feel like if people start to know and start to realize what's happening around, people would start to fight back. And that's something that the upper class, or whatever you want to say, the 1% doesn't want us to know, because that will destroy this society that is terrible right now.
Well, I can tell you one thing. You four, you're strong, you're leaders, you're passionate. I'm proud of you guys for speaking out, no matter what it was about. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. After hearing from our students, what does to say? Also, how do they think we should move forward? You're watching our CBS 19 special report. What's in a name? Hate or history?
There we go. I can reach you.
That's what I'm gonna ask. I said, is that a price on the ladder?
Yeah.
Is that a price on the plane?
We both got up about that.
Yeah, we were able. That's a blessing. What are you talking about?
That's right.
The doctor, I was being busy one day, and I went to the doctor. The doctor, they checked me and everything, and said, well, you're getting up too fast. Pay a $50 copay for you to tell me that I'm getting.
If you're just joining us, we just heard from a few students, 3 who attend Robert E. Lee, 1 from John Tyler, and they, well, to say it bluntly, they were passionate.
Yeah.
They were outspoken, and they wanted change.
Okay, so for everyone that listened to it, because we all heard it in the break room, any thoughts are any of you reconsidering after hearing those students speak? Yes, sir. Oh.
Actually, I kind of found it peculiar how toward the end he mentioned the 1% that wanted to keep him from being that wanted to keep him subjugated. How is it that it's the 1% of people, and who are those 1% that's telling you that because you're a young black student, you have to be a slave to their thought process? I'm not understanding where they're getting 1% from. Who are those to them, and what are the specific people that are these 1%?
I can tell you who they are. They're the same people that tell you to get over it. They're the same people that try to sit up and regulate and tell me what racism is. They're the same people that sit up and try to tell me what I can feel, how I can feel, and when I should be offended, what I shouldn't be offended. Those are the 1%, the old guard that's still that's in power in this city, that old money that runs through Tyler. So with those people still in place, progress can't be changed. We just heard the school board last week when a woman just said that, as long as I'm on the board, the name will never change. Why? It's a different time, it's a different place, it's a different era. We don't want to have that anymore. We don't want to deal with that. We don't want the stigma of that.
I have something I
Yes, sir.
could totally agree with what was just said. I'm going to tell you something. I know a lot of people in Tyler, and most of them are good people. They want to do the right thing.
Right.
And one issue that has come up recently was it's going to cost almost $500,000 per school to change the name. I like to have that contract because I think I could do it for less. But the important part there in timing, all of Tyler should understand, we're about to build 3 schools, right? If we're going to change the name, if we're going to change the image of the schools, the economic time to do it, isn't it?
All right.
Let me also add that.
One quick note, real quick here.
We have, I question the numbers that TISD put out
Sure.
there. I've seen the numbers of what it took Houston, North San Antonio, as well as Austin, and they're dwarfed in comparison to the numbers. So I'd like to know what their sources are.
All right, good stuff. And I believe it was 1.2 million. Was that
1.2 million,
correct?
yes,
Okay, a lot of money is what we're getting at. So with so many different opinions, it's clear this conversation could go on, but is there a compromise that will satisfy everyone involved?
In 2 minutes, how do we as a community work on healing?
Okay, can I set this here?
Yes, sir. Well, tonight we don't just want to talk about the issue. We want to talk about how do we heal.
Jeff Williams joins us. He is the president of the Tyler Together Race Relations Forum. Jeff, what can we do as a community to unite?
Well, the first thing that's always very important is for people to get to know each other. You know, you have to, the first step is always having a conversation.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we always look at each other as an abstract.
Sure.
And we make those stereotypical types of comments or thoughts. And so that's one of the first things that we actually do is try to make sure that we have opportunities for people to have those conversations.
Real quick, can you tell us what has Tyler Together Race Relations Forum done to kind of bring people together?
Well, we sponsor about 6 to 10 different events every year. Just to give you, for instance, we just finished sponsoring a community forum where we had Chief Coble, the fire department chief there. And one of those conversations and questions had to do about future fire stations. But one of those other things that was very important was the demographics of our current fire department. Our current fire department only has 4 minorities out of 160 people.
Wow.
And so what stance are we doing and what is being done about that? Now, luckily, you know, we've been working some things in front of the scene, some things behind the scene to make sure the community is aware of that, but also with our community.
I hate to jump in for you. I know one of the things, just
here,
to touch
Jeff.
on it, we really appreciate it. Thank you so all for tuning in this evening. We hope we've opened your eyes to both sides of this name change debate.
If you missed any of this or want to watch the entire forum again, you can catch it right now on CBS 19's Facebook.